some things impact way more, the equilibrium than others. And those are the things I think that you absolutely want to focus on. So you go from a range that should c-bet 25-30% of the time to a range that takes the whole everything. And so 3 times wider that c-bets the flop, right? You cannot invent value bets because you only have so many top pairs and 2 pairs, but you can find bluffs that should not be there from the flop mistake. And so you end up on the river versus a range that's too weak. You can call like your entire range and print money. So ASI could print or burn money, but it's never zero. Like versus a real human, it's never going to be zero.
All right, welcome back to the Seeking Balance podcast. In this episode, we talk with Thomas Boivin. He is an online and live super crusher. He's truly one of the best in the game and has a ton of insights for you. We talk a lot about the dichotomy of balanced and loose approaches, where they belong in study or play. We talk about the transition to coaching he's recently made. And then towards the end, we talk more about just general well-being and how to approach a life that feels rewarding to you. I really enjoyed this conversation with Thomas. You'll hear me say at the beginning, he's one of my favorite people in poker, and it is very true. And I hope you all enjoy it as well. All right, awesome. Thomas, thank you so much for doing this, man. How you doing?
I'm great, Jared. How are you?
Good. I'm very happy to see you. You're one of my favorite people in poker. I don't know if you know this, but...
I don't know that, but I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I feel like every time we hang out, we always have great conversations. Like I really appreciate your just view on life and everything. So I'm very excited to sit down with you.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I was telling my wife that I have a podcast with Jared, and it's gonna be nice. We always end up talking about interesting stuff, and
yeah. So real quick, just give us a quick update. Like, what have you been up to? How have things been going? What's new in your life?
So let's say that I think the main new things recently is just that I've been taking up more coaching. So I'm like I've switched my career from a grinder maybe 2 to 3 years ago to now maybe like 60-40 coaching playing, and I've liked it a lot. Like it has helped me to grow and to learn faster than when I was just doing things for my own.
Yeah, I've definitely found that to be the case for myself. Like, there's something about just like the process of explaining that you get a lot more feedback and
for sure, 100%.
Yeah, how have you found coaching in terms of like, do you when I first started coaching and especially doing more and starting becoming more like, I guess, around the identity of a coach, it actually improved my mental game in poker because I found there was a different kind of layer of maybe imposter syndrome that kind of comes along with being like, I'm a coach, I know these things. And what can possibly come up in the process of coaching people was a different kind of vulnerability than just like playing, if you will. I don't know if you feel something similar.
Yeah, I can definitely feel what you mean. I think I can relate to that for sure. I think for me, I also feel that I start to understand the game very deeply, like connecting dots that are very far from each other, that, pre-flop dots goes to flop, to turn, to reverse, to small, like, for example, to understanding sensitivity of some parameters. And so being able to take a very extreme decision based on very subtle reads. And so I really feel like coaching made me much more, like somehow like aware, I don't know, like flexible, like, having to always explain why has helped me to understanding like at the root. And it's making me a better player for sure.
Yeah, it also, the more I coached, the more confident I became in coaching, the more confident I actually became in playing, if that makes sense. Like being willing to feel like I can explain something and talk people through it. There was just being confident enough to do that. It translated directly to like, okay, I can. Whereas at a certain point in my game, like there's a portion of my playing where I was very self-critical, I guess you could say, very doubtful, like not really sure of myself often. And it was kind of because I was in this closed system, right, where like I didn't really know. And then there was also a portion of my coaching where I was similarly like unsure of what I was saying and like unsure. And then the more I started coaching and becoming more confident, the more my game became confident as well.
I can relate to that for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I saw. So we were talking about this just before, and we can. Seems like a fine jumping off point. But you just joined the GTO Lab team.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's been my latest addition in terms of. I was telling you I'm making my plate as full as I can. That's the latest ingredient there. But yeah, I was telling you I really jumped on board right away without knowing much about it. Just when I heard who the team was made of, um, like the most solid team I've ever seen. I was super excited to join the project. Um, so that's like another coaching basically access for me where we're gonna do webinars. We're gonna do like we are doing webinars. We're doing videos and yeah.
Yeah, is that the? I'm not really super familiar with it. I've seen some of the ads. I know they have an ICM software. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they basically started from the ICM where they thought, okay, there's like kind of a hole where uh, there's not like a super tool that allows you to study everything in a super sleek way and compare one scenario to another, like many cool features. So that was the starting point, and now they are starting to develop other axes like pre-final table ICM. Also, GPV is in the backlog. Like there's many things that they're doing. They basically the big I guess goal for them is just to get the most accurate and like also usable sims and charts and situations to basically to be able to study efficiently without having like 20 sizings and that kind of things.
And then is it mostly like a video library, or are they doing, like you said, you're doing webinars? Is that
They
part
have
of? I
both.
just
Like the solver, the software is really the main product. But then because of the team that they recruited, they kind of end up having videos with like Dan Devores and I Axton and Nikki P and Leon and like those really goats that aren't really teaching anywhere else. And so I think that the video and the webinar library is really valuable as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, almost more valuable. I mean, this is bias from someone who's a coach, but I got in my talk conversation with Kevin, we kind of got into this, but the whole. I think having anyone can look up solutions and like the requirements to be able to put together even like a reasonable, let's say, ICM database. Like people could do this, but human beings explaining the implementation and that is the like we are all human beings trying to play this game. So having a human being be able to explain how they actually execute the things you see, I think is a far more valuable add to people. People might not feel that way, but I definitely do.
Yeah, I get that. Like when you get to pick the brain of somebody that is excelling at the game for many years, and you just need to learn like a small little thing that you can apply for the next 5 to 10 years, and it's like an enormous value compared to if you learn one new sim and you learn something new about the technical part of the game. It's great, but it's probably not useful for that much and that long.
So do you have a focus of like what it is? Like, are you, when you say you joined the team, are you just part of are you mostly doing like the videos and the webinar stuff too? Is that kind of your main
The
contribution, or are
coaching
you
team,
helping?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Like we all kind of brainstorm to make the product better and everything, but yeah, my responsibility is in the towards coaching and producing video and then hosting webinars.
So if there was something that you felt like made you unique as like a player and a coach that you would, let's say, be contributing to that team, what do you think that would be?
I would say it's probably my structure. um I come like I studied engineering for 5 years in university, and coming from there, I really, when I applied it to poker and I wanted to study the game, I really saw that my most of the competition was more sloppy and more like and I'm like very structured, and I really want to organize my mind in a way that I want to understand every little concept, like isolate parameters from one to another, and I think that's probably something that speaks to some people. um I guess, yeah, that would be the thing.
Yeah, and say more about that. So like when you say isolate parameters, is this like, what does that look like in terms of actually, let's say, studying or coaching? Like, yeah, what do you, are you maybe, yeah, just say more.
Yeah. So okay, my goal is just to understand the game very deeply so that in game I can take a decision based on many variables. I don't want to follow anything. I really want to. I think there's like you said, we are human playing a game, and so I do think there's exploits available on every table on the planet all the time, including Tritons, including everything. And I want to be part of the people who take the money on the table and then sometimes get it wrong and look stupid, but that's okay with that. And so for that to be able to do that, I think it's important to understand what matters in a hand, like easy VIP, like easy opening, slightly lose a pre-flop, easy c-betting slightly more on the flop, easy maybe not giving up just half a combo on the river. Like how do all those things impact the equilibrium? Is it shifting by 3%? Is it shifting by 80%? My calling range? Like some things impact way more, the equilibrium than others. And those are the things I think that you absolutely want to focus on. Like having to call 63% instead of 73% a hand on the river doesn't matter. Nobody's ever going to do it right, and it doesn't matter. But then somebody over bluffing slightly, and then you can call your entire range. Now that's something important.
So can you give me an example of a spot where like something shifting pre-flop can make really different, like let's say even river decisions? Like, do you have a grounded example that might be not too technical and crazy for
for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe not pre-flop to river, but for example, I mean there is some. So let's just say small blind opens, big blind calls. There's many textures where small blind should be using a super polar strategy and using a very big bet or check very often. And 95% of the population, including regs, like in live poker, it's literally 99. There's way more c-bet range type of approach, like c-bet 25% range on most boards. So you go from a range that should c-bet 25, 30% of the time to a range that takes the whole everything. And so 3 times wider, that's the best of flop, right? And so, for example, if you just start from there, if you put that in a computer, the computer is going to readjust because he knows he made a mistake on the flop, and turn is going to be like a super passive nit, like insane and everything. But we are humans, and when we have an open-ended and a flush draw and a gut shot and a good blockers, we bluff, or like most of the time, right? And so that's it basically. If you don't limit yourself purposefully, thinking, okay, I screwed up on the flop, or like I took an exploit and now I have to compensate very, very hardly. If you don't do that conscious effort, your range is going to be slightly too wide on the turn. You cannot invent value bets because you only have so many top pairs and 2 pairs, but you can find bluffs that should not be there from the flop mistake. And so you end up on the river versus a range that's too weak. You can call like your entire range and print money. And that's a big, big exploit. Like it's huge, but it comes from a small, like repercussion of a mistake from the flop to the turn to the river.
Yeah, and these are the kinds of things that I think on average cash game players maybe at the more competitive level are very well versed in, because this is where like all the money is made in cash games, but like maybe less focused on in tournaments. So there's a big edge to be gained possibly in like, these wide range spots. It's just so easy when you like you said, when you take your whole range from one street to the next in a very wide range, it's just very difficult to realize like, oh, I have jack high and that's too good to be bluffing here, or like, there's just like things like this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with you. Yeah, for cash game players, yeah, definitely. I think they just probably they have more time to focus on the more subtle and deep aspect of the game in a way that there's not like 25 different stack depth and ICM and PKOs and
exactly
everything.
Yeah, so I on that point, I've been playing tournaments almost exclusively for the last like 2 years or so, and I have been very shocked at how difficult tournaments are. I was playing higher stakes cash, and yeah, shifting to tournaments has been really, really fun and exciting, but you kind of have to give up the idea that you're gonna kind of just like know every spot, if that makes sense. Like in cash games, I could just study, I could just make passes through like the spots that get played and
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and then get this like level of confidence in the situation of what was going on. And what you're talking about, I think, is really useful, especially for an MTT player, because I think you have to have a far better heuristical approach to situations because there's so many situations that vary so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. Makes me think of your previous question of maybe what in my approach makes me, I don't know, a good coach. And I would say that in the structure aspect, there's also the simplification aspect for me. And so I am a big believer that I make my life easier, but also my decisions more accurate if I can simplify my strategies as much as I can. Doesn't mean range betting everything one quarter, like far from that. But if I can use two sizings instead of four, I'm pretty sure it's better for me on the long run. Now, some people are different. Some people play with all the sizings, and that's, we all have our edges and everything, and I respect that. But I think that's also easier to teach. And I can say, hey, look at these boards. You should play check bet big. These boards, you can bet range, and these boards you should check. You should bet range and then have big and giant size, small and giant size. Like you can do buckets like that. Explain why comes from pre-flop ranges. Connect the dots, and then suddenly you can play all the board in that node. For example, in position versus big line, pretty well on the flop, and that's already a big win.
Well, and that makes playing all the turns easier, and it makes playing. Is it so common that people in tournaments at the high level are trying to approach four size strategies or things like are people still doing this?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
Not
because
at a
I
high
feel like
level.
that. What I feel like that has been fairly well adopted. That kind of approach of just like fewer sizes, more simple. Like what I would say that I think I also believe you excel at based on listening to you talk, and what I think is maybe less well adapted is a simplified approach to deciding, like, do I even bluff or bet? You can simplify your options, but then let's say you get farther down the game tree, and then it's like, okay, now I'm here. Let's talk river, because river is the easiest. Like, I'm here bluff catching, and you mentioned this earlier, being able to have a deep understanding so you can focus on like what are the things that matter. I think trying to find the most important but fewest variables to guide your decision is a way more effective way than trying to have this like infinite variable calculator in your head where you like dial up, like you said, like this perfect precise RNG decision or something like that. And I think that is less less well prescribed to. If you look in people's heads, like people are trying to do things. It is more common that people are approaching or are attempting a level of complexity with deciding to do something than is necessary.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Yeah. But I think it's probably also not the most publicly taught like approach, in a way that, like, I'm not of course doing call range or fold range versus elite opponents. But let's say you would tell all your competition, that's that's what I'm doing. That could lead to some problems, I guess, sometimes. So I'm wondering if some people, when they talk about it, maybe say that, yeah, I'm gonna think about everything and call the perfect frequency, but inside their mind they are like, no, I'm never gonna call with you versus you because I think you underbluff slightly, or like, you know what I mean.
Sure. You're saying you think there's like a gap between what people say and what they're actually doing, or
There might be, but at the same time, I also have the same feeling than you, that maybe people miss the big, like the important stuff.
well, because even against elite opponents, you're saying you might like call or forward range, but I mean, honestly, whether or not you call or forward range is kind of irrelevant because you're never playing a range. You're playing a hand in a spot in a situation like this situation, right? So like you have this hand in this spot,
Yeah,
and you might
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
you might call or fold this hand pure against elite
Yeah,
opponents.
exactly. What I meant is
Tons,
that
right?
every hand is a pure decision. Yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
for sure. That's better. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ASI could print or burn money, but it's never zero. Like versus a real
Yeah.
human, it's never gonna be zero.
It's never zero. Yeah. And I think that is something where I think when I see players of all skill levels run into these moments where they have really difficult times making decisions, it's because of this tension between their kind of model of what they think their decision should look like and what an actual human decision looks like. And we have this instinct, I think all of us, in a spot where it's like, this is either good or bad. Calling is either making money or not. But then we have all of these concepts and language around like EV and like the long run and all of these different ideas and ranges that make us want to and we're trying to mesh these two together. And I think even very good opponents can struggle to do that and not be and have this kind of messy way of kind of fighting what they think is good, but yet trying to layer on logic and ideas to it. And then at some point they just kind of make the decision where they just spin the wheel in their head and do something.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a few interesting things happening in the subconscious too. One could have a strong intuition, but because it has not been reinforced or it doesn't trust the intuition so much, maybe it wants to have control over the situation, and so he's gonna think about all those rational things like, this is the middle part of my range, I should defend it, blah, blah, blah. When intuition has processed 100 times more information, you play poker for 15 years and the intuition processed that in 15 seconds or whatever, and then he just tells you, this is just a fold, bro, you should fold now. And so there's one thing, there's maybe the fear of not controlling completely or not being able to explain on paper why this is good or bad. But that makes me think about another thing, by the way. It's just that something that has helped me recently, maybe over the past 1 or 2 years, is to pay attention to notice the difference between fears and intuition, because they can be very alike. And sometimes you think, yeah, I should fall here, but this is not intuition, this is fear. And then sometimes this is intuition, but knowing the difference is super important, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and I think your fears, this is coming to me right now. I don't know if I would super stand by this, but I think a really good distinction between the two is your fears are often kind of ego driven. Like your fears are something about protecting this idea of you. And so, for example, making a decision that might make you look publicly bad, or that you are unsure of it. Does it mean I'm a bad player if I do this decision? Or if you have these kinds of ego-centered concerns, that is,
or just busting the tournament, ending the fun, just busting ending the deep run.
Yeah, all these kinds of things. That's a very good indication that this is just, you're just afraid of something. But an intuition that is just this, and that's the thing, is you can tell often what your fears are pushing against your intuition, because your intuition, usually your fears come up because you have an intuition of wanting to do something, and they're trying to safeguard yourself, you're
don't do anything crazy, bro.
idea of yourself, and be whoa, people will think we're terrible if we do this. And so I think I just thought of that kind of now, but I think it's a good gauge of because people have often asked how do you tell the difference, and usually you can say well, is this trying to is this ego driven in some way? I think is a good way to think about it. Yeah. So when you're, you mentioned that one of the things that you like this, I find the tension between the kind of structure you're talking about and yet the kind of loose way that you're approaching the game to be interesting. Because I think an easy thing for people is to really approach, let's say, the study of the game in a structured way, but then the result of that is they approach the execution of the game in too structured a way. And then, and then the people who want to approach the execution of the game in a kind of loose way can have this kind of aversion to structured study. How do you find that balance, and what do you have to say about those kind of ideas?
It's really, I think it's super interesting, actually. First, I think that for sure the people who make the most money in this game are all pretty flexible and pretty, not necessarily intuition based, but they are just flexible. They just they can be purely intellectually flexible and understand, like I said, how things can go one way or another quickly. I think I've been playing MTTs full time for I don't know. I say 7 years, but it's been 3 years that I say 7 years. So let's call it 8 or 9. And I've had one bad year and 7 good years. And the one bad year was when I really fell into the solver GTO cage and I started to stop listening to my intuition and want to do the 25% something on the river because I remember I saw it in the solver and I stopped being flexible and I stopped being a beast, not in a way that's an arrogant way, but nowadays I like to say, okay, let the beast out. Like if I feel like I could flat Jack 4 suited on the button in a live tournament versus an opponent, I should do it because I can extract EV in 200 different ways post flop. If I feel like I should fall ace king off in the spot versus a guy who I have a feeling is just gonna, I don't know, not fight hard unless he has a premium, like I should do it. And so when I've before that year, I was purely intuition based and then started to study, got into the cage, had a bad year, had a few talks with a couple friends. And one of them is like a businessman who plays high stakes cash game in Macau and he's winning, even though he's by far technically the worst player at the table. But he is very smart. He has all those macro edges and he started to tell me like there's other things than just a technical edge. There's so many other things that you can, you are good at and you kind of put on the side. And when I started to listen to that, yeah, obviously, like magically, I started winning again. And so coming back to your question, again, my goal is to understand the game super, super deeply. And I use solvers for that to find answers. But eventually in the game, my goal is just to take your money one way or another. Is it by folding? Maybe. Is it by raising? Is it by floating? Is it by under bluffing or over bluffing? Those are spot dependent.
Yeah, and I there's a few ways there's so many things you highlighted there that I think are worth talking about. I mean, one, there's this really fine balance you're talking about, and I totally, when I switched to MTTs, I had the experience of switching, and it's actually the opposite, I guess you could say, of what you're discussing, which is trying to go two solver. That was me in cash, right? When I was trying to win at cash, I had a period of time being way too solver oriented, and again, it's very fear driven. I just wasn't confident. Like I felt afraid of the competition in online cash games, and but then when I switched to MTTs because I had just come from cash, I actually found myself being too loose, if you will. But the result of it was, because I didn't have the same foundational understanding of the spots, it was so hard for me to turn on the same kind of competitive problem solving part of my brain. And I should have just had a more consistent study routine to get me in more into those fundamentals. And it would have, and as soon as I started doing that, I felt the same kind of mind, if you will, I don't know how else to explain it, but the same kind of mind turned back on. It was like, okay, I have the variables in hand now. Like I can start thinking about the things that matter and how I can be problem solving and making crazy decisions and them being punts, but sometimes them being brilliant and doing all of that stuff. What do you find, like when you work with people, what do you find is so hard about that? I do find that balance for people is very difficult to find for a lot of people, right? It's just to me, I really do think at some level it comes down to like self-trust. Like you have to trust yourself. Especially, I think the average person is going to be more what you described, which is they're very solver oriented, very focused on this, but then they don't really allow themselves the flexibility to do things. And because of that, I don't think they experience the headspace of or at least they don't recognize it when they do, of like true problem solving in game, of true problem solving, just how to win in game, if that makes sense. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think people have such a hard time, I think, finding this? Because I think people do.
I mean, first of all, it's really a complex game. So even just I think knowing the baseline is important because, yeah, again, that helps us decide how we can exploit, like based on what, like, you know, like what does my opponent needs to do in order for him to reach the baseline, and do I think he does it enough or not? And so I think there's also a kind of an eternal struggle since solvers have been out, is that, if I do that all the time, it's going to be pretty easy for my opponent to pick it up, like especially online. And so then the counter exploit is super violent against me, and then I'm getting crushed. Like you see that with MDA stables now, right now. So all these players who have analyzed databases and know that, for example, you or like population overfold, I don't know, in the big blind when they raise from the small blind, let's just say. And so now you had like 400 guys who have been raising 80% of their range from the small blind for like 6 months and printing money. But as soon as you realize that, you destroy them, like, they limp fold, like and so I think that is important. If you play online or if you play tournaments all the time, you are professional. Like it is important. Not only because your opponent might write it down and exploit it in the future, just because if your opponent is studying and doesn't have any read on you, he's gonna probably fall back to that baseline, right? And so I think it's important to execute the baseline in some sort, like in the most frequent nodes, and like if you're too aggressive to lose to intuition and you think you can bully everybody, the exploit is very simple. Just click call everybody, like all the time versus that guy, right? So you have to be definitely some kind of, there must be nuance, and you must be not necessarily balanced, but you must be like, yeah, like yeah, it's really not easy to solve. Like what is max EV on the spot? What is max EV in 1 year, and what is max EV over your career if everybody knows you are DJ, like, so
Yeah. I mean, that brings up like I think that highlights an interesting point there, that I think one of the unintuitive things I think in poker is that you don't actually have to be playing spots that well. Like there's something about if you are going in the right direction in poker, you're going to be making more money than if you're like actually playing each hand well, if that makes sense. Like obviously in the micro it will result in hands playing more, but there's a massively, what I have found is like when I'm just find myself, when I just trust myself to make decisions and learn from them, and like I'm just going to be getting feedback, right? One, I just also find myself willing to take decisions that are generally more correct on average. Like I'm just in a different headspace when doing that. That also, this is a bone I pick with a few different people who I've had this podcast with, but now I'm going to do it with you and see, I'm curious what your response will be, because I do have an issue, not an issue, but like the term baseline I think is misleading. And I think it gets thrown around a lot because I think the kind of process that I think that I advocate for, and the one that I try to utilize, is one of just like, baseline is nowhere in my mind. Like I'm absorbing strategy from solvers, obviously, but I'm absorbing principles and how strategies work, and then I'm in game and I'm just doing my best approximation of your strategy. If my approximation of your strategy is baseline, or is somewhat like what I look like in a solver, which then my response, like kind of the decision I end up with, will be kind of my decision of a solver. But if it's not, then it's not going to be. And the reason why I think this matters, because I think there is this kind of sense that people have where it's like, I need to know when or when not to follow baseline, as opposed to just kind of a headspace of like, just play poker at every hand. Like just solve what you just do your best to come up with a strategy that's winning in every hand, and do that and keep doing that. And because what's funny, as a thought experiment, if I gave you solver outputs that were not GTO, they were massively exploitable. That just someone is doing something wrong and whatever, you would learn just as much about theory, right? You would learn just as much because you would still be seeing the variable shift. Like, oh, they're doing this in this spot. This person's doing this in this spot.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
True,
I'd be absorbing all the same ideas.
Maybe more sometimes, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's true. Like balance can be misleading. It can give a lot of noise.
I agree. It's like, GTO or baseline are usually misused. I agree with you, because we don't comprehend that it's so dynamic that for me, baseline is doing like that all the time. Like that's the baseline. And so that's what I call the baseline. But yeah, the idea is exactly what you said. Like you learn many things and then you just, try to take a good decision. And for me, at least, it helps me to see, how many no equity bluff does a solver needs to have to be balanced on the turn. Okay, that's cool. And then I'm in game. I'm like, do I think he has like as many or not, probably not. And so baseline is like fold everything.
Yeah.
That's the new baseline.
I have 10 times as many if we ever play a hand against each other, just so you know.
Okay.
I have way too many no equity bluffs, but continue. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a good point because like I do think we get caught in these kind of these battles, these things that are misnomer, like just they're misleading. Like talking about someone exploiting you, for example. Like one of the things I used to teach when I coach strategy, and I don't coach strategy anymore, but was like your opponent's strategy is fixed. Stop thinking about this like shifting strategy. You're going to make a decision, and they're going to do something in that next moment that's fixed. Now maybe they do something in a different moment, but like give yourself credit. Like, and there's so many people who talk themselves into like not firing bluffs or like not taking advantage of overfolds because they don't want to like expose themselves, you know? And I mean, one of the things that studying solvers will show you is that like it can be really difficult. Even if someone's overfolding in a spot, first of all, they can continue to overfold even after they try to adjust to you. That's one thing. But there's also spots where like the counter strategy to like, let's say if I just get really aggressive against you with both value and bluffs, like too aggressive, the counter strategy is going to be like re-aggress very often, very
Yeah.
aggressively.
Fire with fire.
That is just a gear people don't have. Like a ton of people just don't have in them, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's all kinds of ways that you can put people in spots where people may or may not even have it even in them to respond to you in any way that you need to worry about. But
for sure. And sometimes it comes from the character, like you said. Sometimes it also just comes from the lack of knowledge. Like, what do you do versus somebody who c bets half pot every board? Many people are gonna trap and wait that like I know you see bet your entire range from the button, which is a wide range, on like jack 10 deuce, and you see bet half pot your entire range compared to maybe baseline would be 25%. What's the exploit? How do I take as much money as I can from you? And some people are gonna trap and gonna think, yeah, he's got so many air balls, like but the correct strategy is check raise 40%. And so Jack 5 becomes like the nuts, even like 50, 60 deep, and you have to play for sacks for like 120 bigs. And like you said, people probably don't have that. They don't maybe have the knowledge that this is how you actually make the most money in that spot. And I agree with you that people have a fixed strategy for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and even, my point about the fixed strategies, whether or not people, even if someone's willing to adjust from hand to hand their strategy, they have a fixed strategy in this moment. Like that's the thing that matters. And I think once there were so many light bulb moments for people where they realize like, oh yeah, they're just going to do something concrete in whenever I act. Like I'm not facing a flexing strategy in the next moment. Yeah, and yeah, I think and this is why I think like a lot of the mental game stuff is really interesting to me, and was always like my most fascinating part, because I do think what limits on average in today's environment, I don't think the limit is knowledge. I think people on average have so much knowledge and so much understanding about things. I think the limit is being willing to do something that like if you're in a unique situation in poker and an opponent is playing in a uniquely bad way, the way for you to make the max money is going to be uniquely strange. Like it's going, like you just said, like the Jack 5 example, right? It's going to look ridiculous. And so it is so difficult to make for so many people to make a just wildly out there, like play for stacks with Jack 5, like you just mentioned. It is so hard to do that you can get away with a lot against people because you don't have to worry about them counter exploiting you. But also, I think that is the wall that a lot of people run into in making the maximum in their games is are you willing to just kind of really get out there? What are some of the things that like has helped you do this more? And like, do you work on this much with the students you work with? And
Yeah. Like I said, I'm really like a structured type of mindset. And so for me, it's just really playing with node locks a lot. Node locking a spot and seeing, wow, the response is so extreme. And then when you do that 100 times in 100 different nodes, you have all those extreme responses all the time somewhere there in your mind. And sometimes when it occurs, this is the max EV, and I'm really interested with max EV right now because I want to deep run, I want to win a tournament, you know. So I think my motivation for like putting myself out there and doing what I think is right, even if it's very extreme, is really that I deeply trust that it's a better decision, and it's just a decision that makes more money. And
Yeah, I feel like with you there's more going on here though, because there's seeing it, but like in any moment where you're actually making some of these exploits that you might be seeing good in the solver, you have to have confidence that you're perceiving the situation correctly, that people are making the mistakes that you think they're making. And then you also have to have like the stable sense of, I guess, like security in yourself, that when you get out there and do something crazy, that everyone's going to think you're bad and you're not going to care. For example, like your opponent might think you're terrible. I think that's I think you could take a lot of players, show them the max EV plays in these spots, send them loose on their games, and they would just not do them. Right? They would just, yeah, And so I guess what I'm getting at is what do you think that difference is? Right? Like I give you the knowledge, and yet people don't do it.
yeah, of course, like you said, it definitely comes from the mental game. There's so many traumas and locks that we have lurking in our subconscious without having, like, if you don't do the conscious work to sometimes take time and reflect, or like use tools or coaches or therapists or whatever. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to see, and it can live decades. Look at most of the adults that surround us, like they all have the traumas and locks. And so you for example, you mentioned the self-confidence. What if I look stupid? Like, if you're somebody that was really confident like me, I'm gonna say, like, who cares? Like, the only judgment that matters to me, it's my own. If I'm proud of myself or not, if I think I did the best with what I had on the moment. And if not, then I will still love myself, and it's okay. And this is really, I think, something that can block people, is that if you look stupid, maybe you don't, love yourself anymore so much for that. Maybe like you did something really bad. Like, if it's really deep in the subconscious, you're not gonna go through it with just because a chart tells you should do something.
Is that something you had to work on, this kind of like self-confidence and like the self-acceptance and stuff? Or was that something you felt you had more naturally, or did you yourself go through some of your own work on that?
I think I have had like a really I think my childhood and everything has been great, and I've been given a lot of responsibilities very young, and so I grew up pretty confident pretty fast. So I think I had like an easier task uh, when it came to, yeah, just having faith in myself. Um, but I have, and I'm still working on some completely unrelated to poker areas, um, where I'm really aiming to spot, yeah, some locks. Like, you know why, I don't know, why am I not feeling empathetic in that situation? Oh, maybe it triggers, it's because I've had a loss when I was younger, and oh, maybe. And then, so honestly, alone, it's not at all my strength. I'm such a hard skill type of guy, and so all those soft skills, soft values are really blurry and confusing for me. um, but with proper tools, I'm discovering, like, really, like, that I can create the life I want. I can create the mindset, the emotions, the character, like everything comes to intentions, come to awareness, come to honesty, to, like, with yourself. I'm kind of rambling, but
No, no, no. I think this is all great. I mean, and it's such an amazing gift to be given. I have kids now, so I have two young children. And the most important thing that I want them to have is like that secure sense of self, and that they are like lovable no matter what they do and who they are. And because everything you're talking about, and you saying that you grew up with like a more like secure sense of self, I honestly think nothing makes, even all of the things, the kind of emotional areas you're approaching, all of it is so much easier to approach when even the mention that maybe I'm doing these things poorly doesn't make you feel personally insecure, you know? And I think speaking for myself, this is something that was not natural to me at all. I grew up a lot of self-loathing and a lot of just feeling like I was not good enough, and I did a ton of things to try to become good enough. And that's why I work in the area that I work in now, because I'm so passionate about it. But I think it took me, and it still is, like, it's still hard. Like, the thing that I constantly have to work through is suggestions of any improvement. It feels personal, right? Like, it feels like I feel like I failed. It's not just like, oh, I can improve and like that. It's like, no, I feel inadequate, and I've, even in my personal relationship, somebody says to me something that hey, could you not like do whatever thing? And instantly I'm defensive, and I have to be very like mindful of it and very aware. And I do think it's useful to talk about, because I think there's this, like you said, like before we start examining these things, so much of our sense of ourselves we just believe is just, oh, this is just the way I am and just who I am, and we don't realize, like, no, these are things that can more or less be true at any moment. Like, you can more or less not feel defensive or feel okay with who you are. And
These are
yeah.
programs that we run, really. And like I eventually you can, but it's so funny you mentioned that. I really related when you said something about like being defensive, or like, this is just who I am. And so, for example, I'm going through some growth at the moment, where I'm like um, reflecting in some part of my areas of my life. And so and I don't know if you have another recipe, but the recipe I know for growth start with really uncomfortable situation, and really it's not pleasant on the moment. You've realized that you did, yeah, you did something wrong, or like you closed your eyes on something, or like there's something that, and it doesn't feel good at all. Luckily, I feel like the reward from growth exceeds that discomfort, and usually you end up, first of all, really proud maybe of yourself, but also with a higher quality of life, maybe with a better relationship, maybe a more self-respect, maybe more empathy. Like this, there's so many things that can, you know.
Yeah, and you're just more at home in yourself, because like you said, like the closing your eyes to something is a perfect way to put it, because all of these like kind of things, that emotional things that are in us, and all these defenses we have, it's all because there's some part of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge as true, right? There's something about us we just want to avoid. We don't want to believe it's true about us. We don't really want to like turn our attention to it. But like you said, the reward of just not even fixing something, but just being able to see something and acknowledge it and bring it in, you feel the reward is feeling like you belong, like who you are here in this place, in this body, in this moment is okay. And like, and that's the most reward of all. And that's why I am so passionate about, I kind of use poker as this, uh, as my excuse to really just try to encourage people to feel more and more like they belong, like how you want to do things, how you want to behave, how you like, you don't have to do what is expected of you in these moments. Like, you don't have to be putting on a show. And we really strongly live in a culture that massively encourages putting on a show. That is just like, be what people want you to be. Don't rock the boat. Don't do, and you can see it when you start acting more and more as yourself and with confidence, and like, I'm not worried about what you think of me. You get resentment from people. People resent you for it. They like dislike it, because it's like, no, we're all supposed to be just like playing our parts here. And yeah, I think it's really beautiful to like, there's nothing more, there's nothing better that you can do for yourself than let yourself feel at home in yourself and feel like you belong here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If I can add one thing, it's just I want to remind anybody who listens the podcast that you can really be any version of you that you want. Doesn't mean you're gonna manage to be it tomorrow, or like next week or next month. Maybe it's gonna take you 4 years of once a week, take 30 minutes to reflect about it or whatever. But I really believe that, if I don't know, if you think you weren't sensitive and you're more like this and like that, and it's really just programs, and it's really just opening your eyes, like, and usually getting help by like some great programs. Like honestly, I'm basically following now a self growth program online. That is exceptional. It's amazing. And it's funny how also in the evening sometimes I'm like, damn, I suck, like wow. But then in the morning I'm like, ooh, I'm full of hope now, and I can design the life that I want, and my mindset and my character and everything, like, so yeah, I don't think it's easy for anybody, but I think eventually the life you're gonna get when you pay a little bit more attention to that area, or like that self-growth area, is so incredibly worth it that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I in my last podcast I was talking with Darius Pachinskis, and we were talking, and one of the things I was saying is one of the things that makes me feel really sad is I do think people have this sense that it is like magic, like to like change your life, like it's just like it's random, or there's no real like system for it or something like that, and the place where I found the most self growth is definitely in Buddhism and in meditation, and like that system of like evaluating your inner life was the most rewarding for me. But there's all kinds of ways of, you can find a way to, like, when you think about it, like the life's not magic. Like the things you're thinking and doing, the Buddha said, like the things you often ponder about become the tendencies of your mind. So like the more you just think about things, the more those are the things you tend to think about. And if you just think self-defeating, um, whatever, like self-loathing, whatever kind of thoughts consistently, that's just what the nature of your mind is going to be. You're going to think those things often, and it's really empowering to realize that it's not personal. Like all of the thoughts and ideas and feelings and things that arise in your mind, it's not like personal, and these are just things that are happening. And if you have some way, if you just start thinking those things differently, your whole life will just turn a different direction, And now it's simple, it's complicated. Like that's why, there's all these methods of support and help and, things like that. But it is not as complicated as people make it.
To the root, it's very simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. But yeah, for sure. I mean, just do a test. Take a piece of paper, write 5 intentions where you really want to do something, like how can I be 1% more empathetic today, or that kind of things. Read them every morning for 1 week and see if you feel differently in those areas that you wanted to improve. For me, that's like an enormous game changer. Just doing that. If I don't do it, I start to deviate, go back to my maybe head down, and if I do it, my life is like so much more fulfilling.
Have you ever done a silent retreat by
No.
chance? So you might find this interesting because every year I do what's called a metta retreat. I don't know if you're familiar with metta,
Okay. No.
the process. Metta is it's a practice where it's specifically for developing, I guess you could say, empathy, but more specifically, the word translates as like loving kindness, as like this sense of kindness and benevolence and like friendliness towards people. And so every year I do like a 21-day metta retreat. And what you do is for 21 days, you literally just have there's categories you work with. So you kind of work out, but you often start with yourself or a benefactor, but you literally just day after day, you just say 4 things in your mind over and over and over. And all that it is if it's with yourself, you just say, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, and may I live with ease. And you're not trying to like manifest those things to happen, but you're trying to connect with the wish for it for yourself, this kind of like kind wish for well-being for yourself. And it is, honestly, if there was one thing I think everybody should do, this practice was so transformative for me. Like starting to do it was so amazing because nothing aligned you more in your life than wishing well for yourself, right? Like deeply wanting well for yourself. Like nothing clarifies more. What do I want in my life? What do I want less of in my life? How do I it dials you into this frequency of suffering in your experience that it becomes so clear in any moment that like, oh, I think a thought, oh, that suffered, that hurt. And the base of well-being, of a wish for well-being for yourself, can become so supportive of dramatic change in your life. Like it's really amazing. And just like you said, like with empathy, the natural overflow of that is you just notice the suffering of others much more naturally. Like you just have this capacity to like, but when you're done with 20 days of just wishing well, you're your heart's so open, and really difficult things come up in that process too, like really brutal ways in which you get in the way of wishing well for yourself. It's a really
Oh, wow.
interesting
That
it's a really
sounds,
interesting
yeah,
experience.
that
Yeah.
sounds very deep and very powerful for sure.
Yeah. And yeah, I know it's funny because when I talk with people with poker, often like one of the things I constantly reminding people, like you need to be kind to yourself. Like you need to be kind to yourself. Like, and the performance coaching that I do, honestly, like the main thing that I do is just point out that this isn't whatever story you're telling yourself, whatever situation you're in. You're telling this is like, oh, I didn't do this thing, I didn't do this, I didn't do this. It's not that. You're suffering. All you need to do is notice you're suffering. And if you just keep noticing you're suffering and you just care about that suffering, you really don't need anything else. Everything else will fall into line, you know? But
That sounds like a super cool thing. Yeah. I think you have to pass me the information, and I feel like my wife will be super thrilled if we would go there.
yeah. You could do it at any kind of like Vipassana retreat center. Usually they will have metta retreats you can go on of varying length. I really encourage doing it for like 10 days at like a minimum. Like it's such a, you do it long enough. Your first few, it's funny, it's weird because you'll do it and your first few days will be, you'll be like feeling the best you've ever felt. It's a weird experience. Like you're just like, I cannot believe how good I feel. But then what happens is you're kind of, in a neuroscientific way, right? You're kind of running these neural networks over of trying to find, love and kindness and good wishes for yourself. And then you're naturally you just start running down all the ways that you hate yourself. And so then you'll go through these dark periods where it's just like, but it's beautiful because you have this commitment of just wishing yourself well in the midst of that. And it's a really, really, really powerful experience. But yeah, I got derailed a little bit talking about the meta stuff, but is
I'm
there
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy you did. Might change a few lives. Who knows?
yeah, hopefully. I mean, like I said, I highly recommend it. It was funny because you hear this all the time in Buddhist practice, like practitioners who do kind of insight meditation, which is where you're paying attention to the breath and this. And then they find metta at some point and they realize how just like integral a piece it was. And like without it, like what was I doing this whole time, And I feel similarly. But any other topics you want to cover before we start wrapping this up? Anything else on your mind or worth talking about that comes to mind for you?
Mm, I don't know. I don't know from where it come right now, but I'm just something that has slightly changed maybe in my perception of my life is that I don't always have to go for max CV, but sometimes I can go for max fun or max pleasure in my life. And when I kind of, when I kind of discover that, I'm joking, it was not really a discovery, but I kind of maybe reopened that box, and I was like, huh, okay, it's true. Like in 10 years, in 20 years, when I look back, I don't want to see that I've worked the hardest I could, or that I've made the most money that I could, or that kind of things. I really want to see that, man, I just lived my best life, and that's what you want to see. So I don't necessarily live by it every day, but it's really guiding a little bit more the big decisions and yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I highly recommend you have kids. We've talked about this before, but
yeah, yeah.
we had
You
a
are
conversation.
you are maybe the one, or at least one of the only person who actually brought an argument, or like a reason that I have never thought or heard of before, um, about
Mm,
having kids. And when you told me that you were also very analytical and rational, and reading studies and everything, and then the one day, right, eventually I think you had kids, and then you told me that there are just things that you cannot just comprehend before having the kids. It's
yeah.
like if you try to teach quantic science to a 3-year-old, he's not going to
Yeah.
comprehend it no matter how much you explain it. And so I was like, okay, so that's a good point, that maybe Maybe
Yeah.
I cannot just know right now, and I have to have the kids to experiment it.
Well, yeah, and I think the you know, the literal point that I'll say this because I think we having kids is I'm so passionate about having kids. Like being a father is my favorite thing in the world, and as my kids get older, it just becomes more true. Like it's, you know, where you saw me, I was at my least passionate since then about kids. But
Nice.
no, one of the things is like certain experiences change you, right? So like the things you value are different on the other side of them. So like you're using this value system of trying to determine, should I do this or not? And then you have this experience, and on the other side of it, your values have shifted. And so that is a very hard thing to account for,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure, yeah.
But knowing you and just like, I don't know, having kids has brought so much richness to my life, and like in all the ways. It's been so amazing. And in all the ways that in all the ways that are very difficult to describe. It's just an incredible experience. And yeah, don't believe the studies.
No. We are very positive we will have kids. Not right now,
Oh,
but
nice.
eventually.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, great, Thomas. I mean, it's great to see you. We got to hang out more, man. We'll have to have you back on the podcast at the very least as an excuse to keep talking.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good.
But yeah, is there anything you want to promote before I let you go? Anything you want to push people to, or tell people where they can find you at the least? But feel free to plug anything as well.
Yeah, maybe if you guys want to reach out, I would say Discord, Martumsha, or Instagram, Twitter. I log in maybe every 2 weeks there, so be patient. But maybe Facebook as well. But yeah,
Nice.
Otherwise, have fun, guys. Take care, and just enjoy your life.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jared. See you. Bye.
All right, thank you guys so much for watching. That was Thomas Boivin. Please like and subscribe if you want to follow the Seeking Balance podcast and all other content I'm putting out here on YouTube. And I will leave the link below for where you can add our podcast to your preferred podcast player. I hope you guys have a great week, and until next time.